No one was prepared for what happened that evening on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Legendary action star, martial arts master, and cultural icon Chuck Norris stepped into the studio to promote his new charitable project, a foundation to support veterans. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, the audience roared with excitement, the producers geared up for another triumphant episode, and Oprah radiated her signature warm charisma. But what began as a friendly interview quickly spiraled into a conflict that would go down in television history. What went wrong? And why did this moment go viral, sparking heated debates worldwide? The studio lights flooded the Oprah Winfrey Show. The audience erupted in applause as Chuck Norris strode onto the stage. His trademark confidence, subtle smile, and rugged figure in jeans and a leather jacket ignited cheers. He waved warmly, settled into the chair across from Oprah, and prepared for the conversation. Cameras hummed, operators scrambled to capture every move, and producers backstage exchanged smiles. This high-profile guest guaranteed a ratings hit. Oprah began with her characteristic warmth, her voice soft but laced with a hint of intrigue. Chuck, you're an icon. A living legend. Your new Veterans Foundation is something special. Tell us about it. Chuck, with his usual restraint, replied, It's personal for me. Veterans give everything for this country, and we owe them. My foundation helps with medical support, rehabilitation, housing. It's not just a project, it's my duty. The audience clapped, someone shouted, Chuck's a hero! Oprah nodded, her eyes gleaming, but a flicker of something elusive crossed her smile. She leaned forward, her tone sharpening, almost challenging. That's very noble, Chuck. But let me ask. You talk a lot about duty, but where were you when your Hollywood peers were actively advocating for social change? Why do you, with all your fame, so rarely speak out on political or societal issues? The studio fell silent. The audience, moments ago cheering, froze. The camera zoomed in on Chuck's face, his eyebrows raised slightly, but he remained composed. Backstage, a producer whispered, Wow, she's going all in. Chuck leaned back in his chair, his gaze hardening, though his voice stayed even. Oprah, I do what I believe is right. My work isn't about loud speeches, it's about action. I help people directly through my projects, through my films that inspire. Not everyone needs to shout from the rooftops to change the world. A few tentative claps broke out, but the tension was palpable. Oprah, however, didn't back down. She folded her hands on the desk, her smile turning almost sarcastic. Action, you say? But Chuck, your films are mostly about violence, aren't they? You glorify fighting, guns, strength. Doesn't it seem hypocritical to build a career on violence, and now talk about peace and support? The silence in the studio became deafening. Someone in the audience gasped, others whispered. The camera caught an operator nervously adjusting their headset. Co-host Gayle King, sitting to the side, looked uncomfortable. She tried to intervene. Oprah, maybe we could go back to the foundation. It's such an important topic. But Oprah waved her off, her eyes locked on Chuck. No, Gayle, I want to hear his answer. Chuck, people see you as a symbol of strength, but isn't it time to admit that this strength sometimes does more harm than good? Chuck clenched his fists, but his face remained stoic. He took a slow breath, and a spark flickered in his eyes, the same spark seen in his films before a decisive strike. The audience held its breath, sensing something monumental was coming. Oprah, he began, his voice quiet but piercing, you accuse me of hypocrisy, but let me set something straight. My films are stories about fighting evil, about protecting the weak. And yes, I use strength, but not to destroy, to build. You think helping veterans is just PR? Then you don't understand what real struggle is. The audience erupted in applause, but Oprah pressed on. She leaned closer, her voice sharper. Chuck, those are nice words, but let's be honest. You avoid tough topics, racism, inequality, climate change. You hide behind your strength and charity to avoid responsibility. Don't you? Now the producers backstage were scrambling. One whispered into their headset, This is getting out of hand. Gayle King pursed her lips, unsure how to react. The audience was divided. Some shouted support for Chuck, others filmed on their phones, anticipating a viral moment. Chuck stood from his chair. His movements were slow but deliberate, like he was preparing for the final scene of an action movie. The studio froze. Even Oprah seemed to sense she'd crossed the line, though her face remained defiant. "Oprah," Chuck said, his voice rumbling like thunder before a storm, "I came here to talk about veterans, about people who sacrifice everything for us. But you decided to turn this into a circus. You want to accuse me of not meeting your expectations? Then listen. I'm not hiding. I'm not avoiding. I'm doing what I can my way. And if you think your words can diminish my work or my honor, you're mistaken." He paused, his gaze piercing Oprah before turning to the audience. Real strength isn't about yelling about problems on a talk show. It's about getting up every day and doing something real. For veterans. For families. For those who need help. And I won't let you or anyone else belittle that. The audience exploded in cheers. Some stood, others cried. Gayle King looked stunned, her hands trembling as she tried to speak but couldn't find the words. Oprah, for the first time in the broadcast, looked rattled. She opened her mouth to respond, but Chuck raised his hand, stopping her. "I'm done," he said quietly but firmly. "If you want a show, put it on without me." He turned and walked off the stage. The clack of his boots echoed in the silence, broken only by occasional sobs from the audience. Cameras scrambled to follow him, operators fumbled, and producers backstage shouted into their headsets, "Don't lose him! Keep filming!" As Chuck disappeared backstage, the studio erupted. Some audience members cheered, shouting his name, while others whispered, visibly shocked. Oprah sat at her desk, her face a mix of confusion and an attempt to regain control. She forced a smile and addressed the audience. "Well, that was unexpected. But we'll be back after the break." Gayle King, trying to diffuse the tension, added, "Chuck's a passionate guy, isn't he? Let's give him a round of applause for his work." But it was clear the moment had spiraled out of control. Phones in the audience buzzed. Clips of Chuck's speech were already spreading across social media. The hashtag Chuck vs. Oprah instantly trended. The next day, the moment went viral. Clips of Chuck Norris's speech racked up millions of views on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Some called him a hero for standing up for his dignity and principles. Others argued Oprah was right to ask tough questions, as celebrities should answer for their influence. Comment sections exploded with debates. Some accused Oprah of crossing a line, others defended her right to a provocative interview. Chuck's reputation seemed only to strengthen. His foundation saw a surge in donations, doubling overnight. Oprah faced a wave of criticism, though her supporters insisted she was just doing her job. What do you think of this conflict? Did Chuck do the right thing by walking out? Was Oprah justified in pressing him? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to catch more stories like this. After the commercial break, The Oprah Winfrey Show's studio buzzed like a beehive. The audience whispered, exchanging reactions to Chuck Norris's dramatic exit. The cameras switched back on, and Oprah, regaining her composure, returned to her signature confidence. Her smile was slightly strained, but she worked to keep the situation under control. "Well," she began, addressing the audience, "that was emotional, wasn't it? But the show must go on, and we'll continue discussing important topics." Gayle King, the co-host, nodded, but her eyes darted around the studio, as if expecting Chuck to return. The audience was restless. Some whispered loudly, others still held their phones, recording every moment. Backstage, producers scrambled, debating how to salvage the episode. One muttered into their headset, "If he doesn't come back, we need to pivot the plan, fast." Suddenly, the backstage doors swung open, and Chuck Norris stepped back onto the stage. The studio exploded with applause mixed with gasps of surprise. His face was serious, but his eyes burned with resolve. He didn't sit down but stood center stage, holding a microphone hastily handed to him. "I didn't come back to continue a fight," he began, his voice firm but not aggressive. "I came back because I believe we can do better than tearing each other down." The audience fell silent. Oprah raised her eyebrows, clearly not expecting this turn. Cameras hummed, operators scrambled to adjust angles to capture every gesture from Chuck. Oprah, sensing she was losing the upper hand, responded quickly. Chuck, I appreciate that you came back. But let's be real. You say your actions speak for themselves, but why do you avoid responsibility for the image you've created? Your films glorify violence, and that impacts young people. Isn't it time to admit you bear some responsibility for that? The silence in the studio grew heavier. Gayle King clasped her hands, her eyes darting between Oprah and Chuck, as if fearing another escalation. The audience was split. Someone shouted, "Yeah, Chuck, tell her!" while others gasped at Oprah's boldness. Chuck nodded slowly, as if weighing her words. His face remained calm, but his stance radiated a strength that made everyone hold their breath. "Oprah," he said, his voice low but piercing, "you want to talk about responsibility? Fine. I stand by every film I've made, every scene, every message. But you know what I see? I see people inspired by my stories, not to violence, but to getting up after a fall, protecting the weak, and fighting for justice. You accuse me of promoting violence, but why don't you ask how your shows sometimes turn serious issues into a circus for ratings?" The audience erupted in cheers, louder and more unified this time. Someone from the back shouted, "Chuck's right!" Oprah, however, didn't back down. She stood from her chair, her eyes gleaming with challenge. "Chuck, that's a bold accusation. But let's face it, you avoid political issues because it's convenient. You don't want to risk your popularity, do you? You hide behind charity to avoid engaging in real change." This time, even Gayle couldn't stay silent. She raised a hand, trying to intervene. "Oprah, maybe we're going too far? Chuck's doing so much for veterans, you can't deny that." But Oprah waved her off, her gaze fixed on Chuck. The tension in the studio reached its peak, the clicks of microphones, the hum of cameras, and the audience's nervous whispers created an electric atmosphere. Chuck took a step forward, his gaze so intense that Oprah instinctively stepped back. He raised the microphone to his lips, and his voice filled the studio. "Oprah, you want to know why I don't shout about politics at every turn? Because I believe real change isn't about loud words. It's not about accusing others of not doing enough. It's not about tearing someone down for applause. Real change is when you help a single person, when you give them a chance at a better life. My foundation isn't PR, it's my soul. And I won't let you or anyone else diminish it to make a show." He turned to the audience, his voice softening but no less compelling. "I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying I have all the answers. But I know one thing, if we want to change the world, we start with respect. Respect for those who fight. Respect for those who do something, even if it's not loud or trendy. And I challenge every one of you, think about what you can do for others instead of looking for someone to blame." The studio erupted in applause. Some cried, others stood clapping. Even Gayle King joined in, her eyes shining with emotion. Oprah stood, lips pursed, her face a mix of confusion and respect. She tried to respond, but Chuck raised his hand. "I've said what I needed to say. Thank you for having me, but I'm leaving. Not for drama, but because I believe in what I do." He placed the microphone on the desk, turned, and walked off the stage. The clack of his boots echoed in the silence once more, sounding like a final chord. Cameras scrambled to follow him, and producers backstage looked like they'd just survived a storm. When the broadcast resumed after another break, Oprah tried to regain control. She addressed the audience with a forced smile. "Well, that was intense. Chuck Norris is a man of principles, and we respect his passion. Let's talk about what we can do for veterans." But it was clear the show wouldn't return to its usual rhythm. The audience was divided. Some admired Chuck, others felt Oprah was right to ask tough questions. Phones buzzed, clips of Chuck's speech flooded social media. The hashtag Chuck vs. Oprah soared to the top of Twitter trends, and snippets of his speech were quoted everywhere. Backstage, producers debated how to handle the situation. One said, This is either a disaster or our best episode in years. Gayle King, still on stage, looked rattled but tried to support Oprah, who, for perhaps the first time in her career, seemed unsure how to close the show. Over the next week, the clash between Chuck Norris and Oprah Winfrey dominated headlines. Clips of his speech garnered tens of millions of views, and his foundation saw record donations. Many hailed him as a hero for defending his dignity and principles, but others argued Oprah was right to hold public figures accountable. Oprah issued a statement, saying she respected Chuck and his work but that her role as a journalist was to ask tough questions. This only fueled the debates. Some accused her of being too aggressive, others defended her right to a provocative interview. This moment went down in television history as a clash of two powerful personalities that sparked deep reflection. What do you think of this conflict? Did Chuck do the right thing by returning to stand his ground? Did Oprah cross a line with her accusations? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to catch more stories like this.